Welcome, everybody. We're going to give it a little less than a minute for folks to filter in. While we're waiting, feel free to put in the chat your name, affiliation, and if you'd like an emoji of how you're feeling this afternoon. Welcome. Hope you can get some coffee in. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Michelle Berry. I'm the Stormwater Coordinator with Chesapeake Stormwater Network. And this is our second webinar in our spring webinar series. We are discussing today Reimagine Middle Branch, environmental justice and stormwater management in the heart of Baltimore. And we are lucky to have Brad Rogers joining us today. Before we get started, this webinar will be recorded, just so you know, so that we can post it on our website by the end of the week. I am going to do a quick poll question right after this slide. You're just going to engage with that right on your screen. And questions and comments, you can put those in the Q&A. That's the best way for me to keep track of them. We will have time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. Before the hour is up, we might go over the hour mark with the Q&A, but we'll make sure that we've wrapped up the content of the webinar before 1 o'clock. You can also feel free, though, to use the chat, and I'll do my best to keep track of questions in there, but we will save them until the end. And as always, we appreciate your feedback. At the end of the webinar, I'm going to put a link into our survey to get your feedback on this webinar and any future webinars you might want from Chesapeake Stormwater Network. And it should only take you 2 minutes to do. So as always, we appreciate that. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our quick poll. There are 4 questions. Are you familiar with Chesapeake Stormwater Network, your current affiliation, your location, if you don't mind sharing that, either location of your work or where you are the most? And then when was the last time you had your mind changed? I'm going to give this about 20 more seconds. Okay, so we have most folks participating. I'm going to go ahead and end our poll. And for those curious, as far as when was the last time you had our mind changed, most folks, about 55%, said every once in a while after a really good debate. Somewhere in the middle, 39% said all the time, and about 6% said rarely. And it looks like, as far as are you familiar with Chesapeake Stormwater Network? Today we have a pretty good amount of folks who are familiar, but we have a couple who are not as familiar or who have never really heard of us before. So real quick, what is Chesapeake Stormwater Network? What do we do here? We are a community of 11,000 stormwater professionals from the Chesapeake Bay watershed and beyond. And our mission is to provide free resources and training, capacity building, as well as celebrate the successes and the innovations in the stormwater field and in our community. What does it mean to join the network? Joining the network is free and basically subscribes you to our newsletter, which is called the Stormwater Scoop. Comes out once a month and alerts you to all of our different programs, trainings, resources, gives you a refresher of different topics, as well as the programs that help us celebrate the successes in the watershed, such as the BUBBAs, the Best Urban BMP in the Bay Awards, our biannual retreat, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're interested in finding out more, you can check out our website. And real quick, upcoming at CSN, we do have a couple more great webinars for our spring series. We have one next week, and then we have a bit of a break for spring break. And we have 2 more in April on a range of topics. So I hope you can join us for one or all 3 of these. And finally, this was in our Stormwater Scoop last month and will continue to be, but we do have the capacity at CSN to schedule a few more on-site or virtual trainings with your organizations this year. So if you're interested in finding out more, you can email myself or David or contacting us through our website, and I'll put my information in the chat before the end of this webinar. So with that, in just a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Brad Rogers, who is the Executive Director of the South Baltimore Gateway Partnership for Reimagining Middle Branch, Environmental Justice and Stormwater Management in the heart of Baltimore. Brad, you can take it away.
Terrific. Hi, everybody. It's such a great pleasure to be here. I am thrilled to have this opportunity. Let me pull up my slide deck and we'll get started. At the end, we'll have time for Q&A, and if you have questions you want to drop into the chat, we can get to them so you don't at the end, so you don't forget about them. First, let me just introduce myself and my organization. So I run the most amazing organization ever. It's kind of my dream job. I feel like I'm the luckiest person in the world. When slot machine gambling was legalized in Maryland, the law said that a fraction of the revenues generated had to come back to the neighborhoods surrounding the casinos in order to improve those neighborhoods. And so in Baltimore, we created the South Baltimore Gateway District, which for those of you who are familiar with Baltimore, you can see the casino in the middle. It goes from neighborhoods like Federal Hill and Riverside, kind of wealthy professional class neighborhoods on the east, across through the stadium area where the Orioles and the Ravens play, to Pigtown and Carroll Park on the west, and then down to Westport, Lakeland, Cherry Hill on the south, which are predominantly minority, low-income neighborhoods. And our strategic plan has us working on three things. We want to have the best parks, public spaces, and waterways in all of Maryland. We want to activate all that public space, and in so doing, empower people to lead active, healthy lifestyles. And we want to help our neighborhoods to leverage these improvements in quality of life to be able to attract the kind of investment that they're looking for. So it's essentially a place-based, quality of life first economic development strategy. And what I'm here to talk about is the most exciting work that I have ever gotten the privilege of being a part of, Reimagine Middle Branch. First, let me give you just a little bit of like very basic geography, because even people who live in town often have no idea what I mean when I say I work on the Middle Branch. Anyone who's ever been to Baltimore has probably been to or heard about Baltimore's Inner Harbor, but few people understand that the Inner Harbor of Baltimore is really the northwest branch of the Patapsco River, which flows into the Chesapeake. And people from Central Maryland, the DC suburbs, Howard County, Columbia, they all love going hiking at Patapsco Valley State Park. But few people understand that all the water that they're walking by ends up flowing into the city, because that's the South Fork of the Patapsco River, the South Branch. And in between is the Middle Branch, Baltimore's forgotten waterfront, a forgotten and overlooked waterfront in a forgotten and overlooked section of, to be honest, a forgotten and overlooked city. The history of the Middle Branch is actually fascinating. If you look at the history of Baltimore, you realize that the landscape of the shoreline was quintessentially Chesapeake, that crinkly, tributary-rich shoreline that you would associate with the Eastern Shore or parts of Southern Maryland. And you can see that it had a very rich and well-developed intertidal zone. In fact, there used to be 3,000 acres of wetlands here. And over time, what happened was industry and new neighborhoods began to move from the north southward, beginning to wrap around the Middle Branch until eventually by the middle of the 20th century, huge amounts of land had been filled in for industry, huge amounts of water had been dredged out for shipping. And by 1972, you can see that the Middle Branch was an incredibly intensely developed area. That bridge across the middle of the screen is the eastern terminus of the Western Maryland Railroad. To the right is the Port Covington railroad and port facility, one of the largest and most significant ports for bringing goods into the country from abroad and getting goods out of the country all the way through until to the Mid-Atlantic, from the Mid-Atlantic all the way down to the Ohio Valley. And so what happened was we went from an environment where there were 3,000 acres of lush intertidal habitat, mudflats and wetlands and super tidal and subtidal marsh, to the point where we had just about 10% of that. And of that, everything is basically just bits of phragmites clinging to fill and rubble. And in the big picture, we've got all of the classic urban stream syndrome problems. We have erosion, we have trash, we have invasive species, we have all the TMDLs for nitrogen and phosphorus and suspended sediment. We got the whole thing. Meanwhile, South Baltimore is the heart of Baltimore's port economy, even still to this day. And the port is a really important part of Maryland's economy. It's the 9th largest port in the country by dollar value. If you have ever ridden in a Mercedes, it almost certainly came through South Baltimore. But what that intense infrastructure means is that the neighborhoods are divided, they're isolated. They are island neighborhoods that are divided from their waterfront, they're divided from one another, and they're divided from the region at large. Isolated, overlooked, and ignored neighborhoods in an isolated, overlooked, and ignored section of an isolated, overlooked, and ignored city. But at the same time, there are many great assets for us to work with. We have a very natural shoreline with very few hardened bulkheads. We have signature architectural moments like the Hanover Street Bridge. We have a network of trails that we've been building out over the course of the past 20 years. And most importantly, we have the neighborhoods themselves, which, as I said, are mostly but not exclusively minority, mostly but not exclusively low income, and who simply want the same rights to and access to an ability to benefit from their own waterfront as other neighborhoods in Baltimore take as of right. So if the neighborhood of Canton can use the waterfront as a way to make it possible to raise kids or be a senior citizen, to attract buyers who will buy your house, attract businesses that want to be nearby, then the same thing can be true for Cherry Hill or Westport. And so we say very seriously that Reimagine Middle Branch is the most exciting, dramatic, and forward-looking environmental justice project in the country. It's not a thin veneer of rhetoric built on top of a stormwater project or a capital project or an economic development project. It is an environmental justice project with important capital elements. I'm going to be talking a little bit more at the end about what I've learned as a person coming into this issue and working in these neighborhoods as an outsider, about what I've learned from that, and lessons that I hope to be able to share with others who want to do similar work. What we are doing is we are transforming the Middle Branch from Baltimore's forgotten waterfront into Baltimore's next great waterfront, with 11 miles of parks and trails and community development projects wrapping all the way around the waterfront from the the Port Covington Peninsula, now called Baltimore Peninsula, around through the casino entertainment area at the base of the stadiums, coming down the Westport waterfront and wrapping around Cherry Hill, going all the way to Brooklyn and Masonville Environmental Education Center in the South. We went through a 3 or 4 year process of developing the Reimagine Middle Branch plan, which was adopted unanimously in Baltimore a year ago. And if you've ever tried to get a plan adopted, or really, if you've ever tried to do anything in Baltimore, you'll know that getting something unanimously adopted with no negative comments, no backstabbing, no backbiting, no angry letters to the editor, no political pressure, none of it, is a huge undertaking. It means really seriously listening to everybody and making sure that they see their priorities and their desired future represented in the plan itself. The plan that's been adopted is on our website, reimaginemb.com, and we'll put that in the. I'll put the link in the chat later on. But the plan is much larger and bigger than anybody. Oh, I see someone has raised their hand. I think what we're going to do is, unless it's urgent, we're going to ask you to put your question in the chat, and then we'll get to it at the end. And there'll be a ton of time, so please don't forget your question. I definitely want to get to it. The plan is much larger than we have time to talk about, and goes far beyond stormwater to include things like parks and economic development. But let me give you the big picture of what we're doing. The plan essentially breaks down into two halves. One half is the land side work. We want to have a network of world-class parks that go from along the waterfront, but also out into the surrounding neighborhood, what we call the park shed, that are all stitched together by a network of trails and green boulevards, all of which form a framework and a foundation for community-based economic development projects that are not just along the shoreline, but extend deep into the surrounding neighborhoods and address issues that go far beyond stormwater management and water quality to get into recreation, youth development, career development, senior citizens, all the issues that our neighborhoods face. I'm going to give an example of what that looks like. Here's the point where the South Fork of the Patapsco comes into the Middle Branch. And you can see the very narrow channelized river. To the left, you have the neighborhood of Cherry Hill. To the right, you have the neighborhood of Brooklyn. But if you go back less than 100 years, you see that this is actually a wide river delta. This was the mouth of the South Fork of the Patapsco. And as a result, it looked like just like any other river tributary mouth in the Chesapeake, wide, with reeds and birds and islands and really good fishing, prime habitat. If you look at the 1904 Olmsted plan for Baltimore's parks, Frederick Law Olmsted, the great landscape architect who designed, among other things, Central Park in New York, and basically shaped the great American cities. The 1904 Parks Plan for Baltimore said, oh my gosh, look at this huge opportunity. We should have a greenway coming down the Gwynn Falls, wrapping around the Middle Branch, then heading out the South Fork of the Patapsco, the South Branch, connecting Baltimore to Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, eventually Howard County, so that we're all integrated together as one big region through this incredible ecological resource. And so, of course, what we did was we built an incinerator there, put it next to a Black neighborhood, and used the ash from the incinerator to fill in the wetlands, because that is the Baltimore playbook. Instead of celebrating and embracing our environmental resources and our minority communities, instead we have burdened both of them. I have a board member who talks about how he used to have to get called in by his mom when playing outside because ash would begin raining down on the children. And here's a letter that I dug up from 1962. This is the one of the neighborhood matriarchs, Madeline Murphy, mother of Billy Murphy, who would later, the attorney who would later run for mayor. And she was saying, you promised us that we would have a nice park here, that you would get rid of the incinerator, that there'd be places for kids to play. Could you imagine this happening in a wealthy white neighborhood like Guilford or Homeland? Why are we a commercial and industrial dumping ground? And that was in 1962. And it took 60 years, almost to the day, but we cut the ribbon on the $25 million Middle Branch Fitness and Wellness Center located on the site of the old incinerator. A brownfield site built on top of ash and a 3-foot clay cap, the nicest recreation campus in all of Baltimore, with indoor and outdoor pools, indoor and outdoor basketball courts, indoor and outdoor walking tracks, one of the nicest government-owned buildings in the city. Next to it is a $3 million turf field we built with the Ripken Foundation. The neighborhood of Cherry Hill now has a nicer place to play sports in the neighborhood of Federal Hill. It's an incredible turnaround from what one would expect. And my organization, like I said, we receive about $8 million a year in casino revenues. We put about $500,000 a year into youth sports, both at this facility and in other low-income parts of the neighborhood, so that of the district, so that kids are outdoors using our parks, developing a culture of fitness, claiming public space as their own. And we're taking this model now beyond the waterfront. This is the Carroll Park Rec Center, or rather a future vision of the Carroll Park Rec Center. Carroll Park Rec Center is a kind of nasty concrete block building that was built in the 70s. It's been empty and vacant for 20 years. For 20 years, kids have been like pounding on the door and unable to get in because there's been no access. It's been locked up and filled with garbage for 20 years. So we're putting $3.5 million into renovating and reopening that rec center, which is right next to Carroll Park in the Pigtown neighborhood. That'll be open and available to the public this summer for the first time in decades. Along the waterfront, we have the western shore of the Middle Branch is the Westport neighborhood. This is the former site of the Carr Lowry Glass Factory, a huge glass manufacturing facility that shut down many decades ago. Now the site is being developed as the One Westport development, and we are working with the developer. We created an MOU. The developers agreed that they're going to that my organization will fund the design of a park that would be a 9-acre, half-mile-long waterfront park. The first time the community has ever had access to its waterfront. I'll make sure that the neighborhood is the primary driver of what the design of that park is. The developer is going to pay to build it, and then we'll donate it to the city of Baltimore. This is a radical new vision, something that, again, would never have happened in the past. And literally just today, I was having a design meeting about this park. It is happening and moving forward. At the heart of that Westport waterfront is going to be a memorial to the Baltimore Black Sox. The Black Sox were an incredible team of astonishing athletes. They won the 1929 Negro League World Championship. Multiple members of the Black Sox have their names on the wall in Cooperstown at the Hall of Fame. Satchel Paige played in South Baltimore. This history is overlooked, ignored. It's criminal that these stories are not right at the forefront of our conversation of the history of South Baltimore. And so we're working on a huge sculpture garden of 10-foot tall bronze statues commemorating the great athletes of South Baltimore. And right now, students at Coppin State are doing primary research, not only in looking through the archives of the Baltimore Sun and the Afro and other places like that, but actually interviewing family members of great Negro League players. And so there's very exciting stuff happening. Right next door to that is the Middle Branch Marina. This is a privately owned marina that's been leased in significant part by the Environmental Justice Journalism Initiative, or EDGI, the a Black-led environmental nonprofit focused on helping communities become the reporters telling their own stories of environmental injustice. And they have now partnered with major academic institutions who are doing research right there on the from the docks of this marina on the Middle Branch. This is a turnaround. Normally, the small grassroots environmental nonprofit has to try to piggyback on the work being done by the large academic institutions. Now, the large academic institutions are piggybacking on the work being done by EDGI. It's fantastic and creates fascinating partnership opportunities. That is the land side, the first half of the work. The second half of the Reimagine Middle Branch plan is the water side work, restoring in particular the natural shoreline, the intertidal zone, which is so classic for the Chesapeake. They are the kidneys of the bay. They are the nursery of the bay, where the juvenile species hide. They are what protects the shoreline from erosion, from storm surge, from storm damage. And we call this the Middle Branch Resiliency Initiative. So far, we've raised $56 million. Hopefully in the next 45 days, that'll become $67 million. And we have about $150 million, $200 million of the grant applications outstanding. We see this as the most ambitious urban shoreline restoration project in the country. And we are actively working our way through. This was, I don't know, a year and a half ago when we only had 48 million. So had all these major stakeholders and elected officials celebrating major funding that had been coming, that we had been awarded. The first stage of the Middle Branch Resiliency Initiative is going to protect two critical locations. To the north, you have the BGE, Baltimore Gas and Electric Spring Gardens campus. For those of you who are familiar with Baltimore, if you've ever come in off of 95 on those big skyways that take you, those big ramps that take you into downtown to the stadium areas, these are the big tanks that have murals on them right by the side of the highway. It's just, a couple of $1 billion worth of liquefied natural gas facility located, I don't know, at 5 to 7 feet above mean high tide. It's been there for 150 years. It made a ton of sense back when you were barging coal and things like that up the water to the facility. Now it's very low-lying land with really critical infrastructure. To the south, we have MedStar Harbor Hospital, a major regional medical facility serving Baltimore City, northern Anne Arundel County, and Baltimore County. Also right on the water, also right in a situation where ambulances coming from the south have to cross over a bridge to get to the hospital. In fact, the neighborhood as a whole has only 3 ways in and out, 2 of which are bridges. And so both these areas have been identified in multiple places as in chronic and escalating risk of flood risk. And what we're going to be doing, and this is an illustrative picture. I wasn't sure quite exactly what level of detail to get into for this presentation. So this is sort of an artist rendering, not an engineer drawing. But basically what we are doing is we're now funded to create, to build wetlands all around the hospital campus, including its southern approach on the Brooklyn side of the water, and up at BGE Spring Gardens, nature-based resiliency infrastructure for both. And we just were awarded $1.2 million to begin designing wetlands at Smith Cove on the left side of the screen over here. That's another major opportunity for stormwater treatment. There are 2 enormous stormwater outfalls there that dump untreated stormwater from a 350-acre subwatershed right into it. In fact, BGE has a huge stormwater outfall that drains from the peninsula neighborhoods up here. Smith Cove has 2 that drain from Westport, Lakeland, Cherry Hill, all the water coming off of 295. And then there are, of course, similar ones over here. So these are resiliency infrastructure in name, but also water quality infrastructure in function. And if you put all that together, you see that the distinction between what's a stormwater project and what's a resiliency project and what's a recreation project and what's a community development project and what's an economic development project all begins to blur, because you realize that in an urban context, they can all be one thing. And honestly, the difference between one and the other is largely about who the funder is and which priority you want to emphasize most. So I'm going to show some visualizations. Here we are coming from the south, past Harbor Hospital. You can see the wetlands that are going to be breaking ground this spring. Here we come up the Hanover and Poteet Street corridors. These are major overbuilt highways that divide the neighborhood from the waterfront, and we want to make them attractive, complete streets for everybody to be able to use, including the port and the neighborhoods. Here we're coming up on Middle Branch Park, an existing park. We have a lot of improvements, starting with making it safe and legal for people who live across the street to get into their own park, which currently it is not. Once they get there, there are going to be huge amounts of landscaping enhancements, trail enhancements. This is, as we're now coming up on the event lawn, where every year there's the Cherry Hill Arts and Music Waterfront Festival, which happens on the 4th of July. This is was a small community arts festival that we've built up to a major 4th of July celebration. There's 8 hours of free family-friendly music, usually culminating in a Grammy Award-winning artist. Thousands of people show up, and then we have a barge that comes up the water, and at 9 o'clock, fireworks shoot up right there from the water. It's an amazing experience. If any of you are looking for something incredible to do on the 4th of July, please come to South Baltimore. We have free parking, we have free music, we have beautiful parks, we have waterfront, we have excellent highway access, we have great food. It's incredible. Coming from the north and looking at Middle Branch Park again, you'll see the Middle Branch Boathouse, which exists, but which is now so full of kayaking, canoe, and crew programs, we need to triple the size of it in the coming years. And then we're working on making world-class park infrastructure that serves not just the adjacent neighborhoods, but becomes a place of regional significance and a crown jewel for Baltimore, including, among other things, making it useful year-round by providing enough shade. I don't know if any of you are familiar with what life is like here in the summertime, but it is not particularly hospitable to human life. And so we want to make sure that that regardless of temperature or season, people can get out and enjoy the water. And similarly, irrespective of whether you feel comfortable in a canoe or a kayak or a sailboat, or a motorboat, or whether you don't feel comfortable in any of them and you just want to get out and feel the water on your face, we want you to be able to experience Baltimore as a Chesapeake City. And I know that there's a lot that I've shown and that these are kind of visualizations, but I want you to understand that these are things that are really happening and happening at an accelerated pace. We have a current pipeline of work either underway or completed of $175 million. And that's just public space enhancements. It doesn't include private investment in things like the Baltimore Peninsula development, or the One Westport development, or or anything like that. The Casino Entertainment District. This is all public space enhancements, which are already fully funded, and we're looking to double that over the next 5 years. So this is a big deal, and it raises a lot of very interesting and important questions about equity, about things like gentrification, about public participation. And I just want to share some of the lessons that I've learned. And I want to be clear as I'm saying that you know, I am not a resident of these neighborhoods, and I'm working hard to be a partner with these neighborhoods, but I don't speak for them. But I can tell you about what we've done. And the first step was to create a process which was capable of generating a big, bold, visionary, and equitable outcome. And our process started a year before we even began the design process. We went through a year-long process of dating where the community got to pick their own design team. We had an international design competition. The firms that participated had to come not only tour the site and learn about it from the community, but be interviewed by the community. I say the community largely, it's multiple communities, but by the neighborhoods, and got to be grilled on what was their vision and how would they work with people and how would the neighborhoods be sure that their priorities were being put front and center. And then after picking the design firm, there had to be a design team, because of course you can't have one small group of people. You need to have people with a wide range of expertise who are equipped to work in complex, diverse neighborhoods. And so we had a team of subcontractors who were part of the design process, including folks with expertise in wealth building in low-income neighborhoods and African American cultural geography. Kofi Boone, the professor who wrote the seminal Black Landscapes Matter article, laying out approaches to doing this work in neighborhoods that have been overlooked and ignored and have lacked visibility. So we had to put together a team that could do it. And then we had to put together groups of people to engage with this team of professionals. So we had to have a community advisory committee representing every neighborhood in the study area, even if they weren't along the waterfront. And we had to have an equity committee that involved people with expertise in justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion to make sure that the process was generating the outcomes we were looking for. And then we had to do things which no one had ever done before in a planning process, including creating a special community design lab for teenagers so that they could learn about the planning process, be engaged in understanding that they are the future generators of the future and need to be equipped to handle it. They worked on independent projects where they designed and came up with proposals that were some of which ended up in the plan, and they all got paid to do it. This was a paid training and learning and growing opportunity for teenagers. And we had a similar set of paid fellowships for graduate students at Morgan State University, a terrific HBCU partner in Baltimore, who worked alongside the design team and then got to do independent work, which in many cases ended up part of the final design. So you have to be innovative in your approach and inclusive in your approach to the process. And then when you're looking at your outcomes, how do you make sure then that the outcomes that you generate themselves reflect the aspiration of your good intentions going into this? And the answer to that is that you have to really listen hard, become good partners with community leaders, make sure that the things in your plan reflect community priorities. And I want to go back to this Carroll Park Recreation Center. The Carroll Park Recreation Center seems like a good idea, but it's not just a good idea. It's something that the community had been clamoring for a very long time. In fact, just in 2021, someone filed an inspector general complaint arguing that the park, and in particular the rec center, had been actively overlooked in violation of city policies and local laws. And so to go from this requires listening to that and seeing that this is an important part of an environmental restoration project, and that you can't just say, no, I only want to look at the shoreline, I only want to look at the waterside work. You have to look at the landside work if that's what the communities are telling you that they need. And one of the things that communities have been saying very loudly is, we want to make sure that we are beneficiaries of this, not just as recreation, but economically. And so what we heard was we need to create a native plant nursery. And so we're in the process of creating the Chesapeake Environmental Restoration Academy to train a new generation of environmental professionals. And to be able to buy the plants we need from ourselves. Because again, if you're going to do a couple $100 million worth of environmental restoration, you might as well buy the plants from yourselves. And then what do you do with, how do you deal with new investment? One of the big questions everybody always asks is about gentrification. That's certainly a concern. How do you make sure that as you're creating improved quality of life, that you're responding to past environmental injustice? How do you deal with the fact that those improvements will be reflected in the way the market perceives real estate in your district? And the answer is you have to bring everybody together and you have to position the communities to be the beneficiaries of change and the drivers of change. And so we've done that in two big ways. The first is that we created a $900,000 fund so that local community development corporations could have operating support for 3 years to bring on new staff, professionalize their operations, gear up to be able to acquire land and vacant properties in advance of gentrification so they could begin to control their real estate destiny. And then we just launched this this past fall a $3.5 million community development fund, which has actually been matched by $1.5 million from the city. So it's really a $5 million community development fund, connecting people to $30 million in outside financing in loans and tax credits from local community development financial institutions, essentially nonprofit banks. And so now there is a pool of funds that the neighborhood can go to begin to create real estate projects that position themselves as the drivers of the change in their own neighborhood, not the passive recipients of outside investment. And again, if you're from a traditional stormwater management model, this seems like a wild, ridiculous, totally separate topic. Why are we dealing with this when we should be just dealing with nitrogen and phosphorus? And the answer is because in an inhabited urban environment, this is all part of one conversation, and you can't deal with one without dealing with the other. You can't attract investment without having a high quality environment, and you can't create a high quality environmental situation without also having a plan for how that will affect investment. And so in the big picture, the lessons that I've learned, again, as a respectful partner to local communities, but not a representative of those communities, everything that we've done to get this far has been founded on ongoing partnerships between respected equals who understand one another, have the ability to work together, have the ability to talk and communicate. As someone coming into neighborhoods, particularly low-income neighborhoods, I'm always really focused that my job is not to turn them into my army, but rather to be of service to them. And as a result, be able to find where our shared interests overlap. We also had to learn to talk to one another. And I tell you, if I had come in and said from the get-go, our goal is to make sure so that people in this neighborhood can kayak more. You guys aren't kayaking enough. You need to be doing more kayaking. They would have looked at me like I had 3 heads because they hadn't been asking for kayaking. They weren't looking for kayaking. They weren't even thinking about kayaking. What they were asking about was, what are we going to do with the site of the old incinerator? How are we going to make sure that our youth sports programs have enough money so that the kids can reliably go to them? What are we going to do about the rec center that's been shuttered for 20 years? We had to begin to build trust around that. And then when the topic turned to kayaking, people were able to say, well, I don't personally need to kayak, but I don't want my kids to be told they're not allowed to kayak. I don't want my kids to, now that we're dealing with other things, I don't want my kids to not have the option to kayak. And suddenly we were able to talk about things that were not possible before. Trust is something that is earned and is not the result of you having an advanced degree or being credentialed from an institution. That might work when you're applying for a job, but not when you're talking to real people out in the world. You need to add value, being of service, and do it in a form that they can recognize. And so if that means, again, that on your way to talking about water quality, you have to start with picking up trash, that might be the only useful pathway. And the most important thing, and this is hard when you care about the world and have been trained with a master's degree in something or other and have professional expertise and you're funded to go do a project, it's hard to be humble. But one of the things I would just say is that if you find yourself in conflict with the community in which you're trying to get work done, and they're not listening and they're not understanding and they're not seeing the value in what you're doing, then maybe what you're doing is not as perfect as you thought. And with a little bit of listening, you could make it more perfecter. So that is my presentation. And I am, again, really grateful to have had this time. We have about 15 minutes left. And now I'll turn it back for questions and conversation.
Thank you so much, Brad. That was a wonderful presentation, very engaging and informative. I'm going to stop our recording here.